This is a short video explaining the idea of comparative advantage as being the root to all trade. Comparative advantage is the economic concept that is based on the idea of opportunity cost. And basically what comparative advantage says is that people should produce and trade based on who has the lower opportunity cost in any sort of trade relationship. And I'm going to demonstrate this with a very simple example here of two characters, Thor and Felix, who produce both houses and food. And the question is, who should produce what, trade to whom, and for how much? And what we're going to get at in this model is how these two individuals, driven by their own self-interest, will choose to produce something, and result will be a wealthier world, and both of them will agree to trade in a way that is mutually beneficial. And so this simple idea developed by David Ricardo is used to explain where trade comes from and why trade can lead to a happier and wealthier world. So let's start off with our two individuals, Thor and Felix. And both Thor and Felix can produce houses and food, although they're not equally good at producing houses and food. Thor is very good at making houses, and not so good at making food. Felix is not so good at making houses, but he's quite good at making food. Basically, what this chart shows is, in a set amount of time, how much houses Thor could make if he fully utilized his time, and how much food he could make if he had the same amount of time. So he could have either 5 houses or 2 foods. Felix could have 1 house in the same amount of time, or 4 food. Now the first point I want to get to is why specialization in labor actually leads to a wealthier world. In this case, imagine Thor and Felix have to split their time between houses and food. They have to be self-sufficient. In this case, Thor, after his allotment of time, would have 2.5 houses and 1 food. Likewise, Felix would have half a house and 2 foods. Their entire 2-person world, its total wealth, would be 3 houses and 3 foods. Good, but could they do better? The idea of David Ricardo was that yes, they could do better. They could do better if they weren't self-sufficient, if they instead specialized. And the way this would work is, Thor would specialize in the thing that he has the lowest opportunity cost in. In this case, it's houses. Every food he makes, he gives up a significant number of houses. But Felix is good at making food. For all the food he makes, he gives up very little houses. It's better to have Felix focus in on food. His opportunity cost there is quite low in terms of houses. Thor has a very high opportunity cost for food. He gives up a lot of houses. Therefore, Thor is going to specialize in houses. Felix is going to specialize in food. If they specialize, at the end of the day, they will have a world with 5 houses and 4 foods. They are materially better off than when they had to do it by themselves. The problem they have now, however, is that Felix has all the food. Thor has all the houses. Thor wants food, Felix wants houses. How do they get them? Well, they're going to have to trade. And they're going to trade in a barter exchange, houses for food. What is a good rate of exchange? This is a tough question. But we can answer this question by thinking back to what they were like by themselves. Felix knows he can produce houses. Yeah, he has only food, but he could make houses. But they're expensive for him. Why would Felix ever trade with Thor? Why would he ever want Thor's houses? Well, he would only want Thor's houses if he could get a better deal than he could have gotten on his own. Only if he would be materially better off after the trade than if he had been left to his own devices. Now, if you look, with Felix, there is an opportunity cost here. This 1 to 4 is really Felix's opportunity cost. And what this means is that if Felix could get a house for less than 3 foods, he will. If Felix could get an exchange rate of one house to 2 foods, 1 house to 3 foods, he will take that deal because he's better off than he otherwise would have been. If the choice is 1 house to 5 foods, Felix won't take that deal because he's better off on his own. He doesn't need Thor. So Thor, if he wants to buy some of Felix's food, he needs to offer Felix a good deal. That is, a deal better than Felix's opportunity cost. See, this 1 to 4 opportunity cost is the place where Felix will walk away from the deal. But over here with Thor, his opportunity cost of houses for food is there. And this is another ratio that Thor will not accept. And what we can do is we can think about all the different possible ratios of houses to food that fit within this range. For example, 1 house to 1 food is within this range. 1 house to 2 foods is in this range. 1 house to 3 foods is in this range. Any of these possible exchange rates of houses for food fall between Felix's opportunity cost and Thor's opportunity cost. Any of these exchange rates are mutually beneficial to Thor and Felix. Any of these exchange rates will leave Thor and Felix better off than they would be by themselves. Any of these could be acceptable exchange rates. Which is the best exchange rate? That's very hard to say. Really, it comes down to the bargaining power of Thor and Felix. Economists don't really care what exchange rate they settle on, as long as they settle on some exchange rate that is mutually beneficial. And the logic is that as long as Thor and Felix are both self-interested, rational individuals, they will settle on some exchange rate that is mutually beneficial, depending on their opportunity cost. The key idea to see here is that their specialization leads to a wealthier world, and what they're really talking about here is how to divide that extra wealth in their world, how to divide the benefit of their specialization. That ultimately is how the trade works out.